Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, directed by Tim Burton, stars Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, and Jenna Ortega. After a family tragedy, 3 generations of the Dietz family return home. Still haunted by Beetlejuice, Lydia's life is turned upside down when her teenage daughter Astrid accidentally opens the portal to the afterlife. Out of everything coming out this year, this is a movie that I've been both equally excited for and have felt very nervous about seeing, not only due to the fact that the original Beetlejuice holds a special place in my heart, but in my own childhood I had this strong connection with the movies of Tim Burton. It felt like when I was a kid, he was one of these directors I was able to identify by name alone, and that's most likely down to the easily recognizable style of his movies. However, as I've grown older, I've been unfortunate enough to witness a downfall in his career, as his style seems to have gotten completely saturated with every new entry in his filmography, and I'm under the impression that the guy hasn't made a truly great movie since Sweeney Todd. So with all of that in mind, did this sequel live up to the clearly high expectations I've made for myself? Firstly, I'll talk about the performances, starting with Michael Keaton. I think the guy does a really good job here. Unlike another recent franchise movie that brings one of Keaton's iconic characters back for that sweet nostalgia bait that Hollywood loves, it actually feels like here he's really enjoying his time being this character again. Clear that the guy is having so much fun in the role again. He gets a lot more screen time than he did in the previous movie, but whenever he does appear on screen, he makes an effort to steal the show at any opportunity he gets. It was endearing and odd to see him still pull off this sense of charm despite supposedly being an unsavory type of character. Screenplay allows him to have a dynamic with most of the supporting cast here, and he always works off them really well. I haven't heard if Keaton did his usual improv, which he brought to the character in the original, but despite this, he manages to gather most of the big laughs that the movie has to offer from his performance alone. As odd as it is to say, I actually thought the dynamics between him and Lydia was done well, and brought some really sweet moments between the two characters, even if it's more one-sided than anything. Winona Ryder is good here too. It was interesting to see the development of her character between the first movie and this movie, and I thought what they did with her made the most sense to where they could take an adult version of this character in the modern age. She did a good job at balancing moments where she allowed herself to bring a sort of unhinged energy without coming across as too manic, while also displaying a believability to her motherly side when she shares the screen with Jenna Ortega, who plays her daughter in this. There's many moments where we see her care for her without doing the overdone, overprotective aspect, as we see these two characters at the beginning of the movie seem to be estranged for reasons that get explained later in the movie. Her dynamics between Beetlejuice, like I mentioned, was handled really well too. She begrudgingly goes along with him when they team up, and while it's clear she doesn't trust him, they still work back and forth off each other really well. Jenna Ortega did good in her role. I will admit it did give off the impression that she was only cast in this movie as Tim Burton already had her on her payroll from the 2 of them collaborating on the Netflix show Wednesday. But putting this aside, she does fit in with all the cast here to an extent. Personally, I think this movie is another example of pushing her into a role that doesn't really work for her as an actress. This could be a me thing, but I don't get the weirdo outcast type from Ortega, despite her clearly being drawn to these types of roles. That being said, I do think the woman is cool and she is good in certain roles, but this aspect feels like it's something that's beginning to come across as forced. As for the performance itself, she does an okay job. It's nothing too great, and it's nothing too hard or challenging either. Like I said, it feels like anyone around the same age could have pulled off this role just as well. The dynamic between her and Winona Ryder's character felt believable from her perspective. As the plot continues and you watch the two characters, you're hoping for them to reconnect one way or another. I thought Catherine O'Hara was another actress who did a really great job with the material she was given with. I always thought her character from the original movie was certainly one of the many standouts, and she proves to be the very same here. There's another natural progression for her character from where she is at the time of this movie's events, and it feels like another natural step for her character. She brings a lot of unhinged energy to her role that was just as prevalent as it was in the original. She was another person that brought most of the big laughs out of the movie. She's definitely one of the funniest people here. I didn't expect her to have as many funny moments as she did, but when they were there, they were always great. Willem Dafoe does such a great job in his role too. I loved his design. I thought it looked really creative and cool. I loved the lore of his character, essentially being an actor who died on set and is now stuck in character in the afterlife was such a cool idea to me. With this, it obviously gives way to a really fun and silly moments from Dafoe. He hams it up so much throughout the entire runtime. He's another example of someone who just steals the screen whenever he's on screen too. He gets a lot of really good laughs from the way he delivers his lines, and it's clear he's having so much fun in his role as he does in what feels like every role he's in, especially recently. Monica Bellucci shows up here, and I guess I can say she's good, but she's honestly doesn't do that much. To start with, she isn't given many lines. I will say I think her introduction scene rips so much. Everything about it is really cool, and she even shares the screen with Danny DeVito, who's only in one scene, which was sad to see, but it's really cool to see him here all the same. Despite this and throwing around some threatening, generic, evil villain dialogue, she doesn't do much else besides looking hot, and if that's the reason you put her in a movie, then yeah, I get it. I did read that Tim Burton is actually married to the woman, so that makes a bit more sense. Her design was pretty cool, and it was reminiscent of the Sally character from Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, which was a nice nod if that was intentional. It did feel like if her character was taken out entirely, and if you wrote some things differently, her character wouldn't be missed all too much. Right off the bat, I need to talk about the visual effects in this movie. This is hands down one of the best looking movies of the year for many reasons, mainly for the use of what seems like a good chunk of the runtime having a ton of practical effects. It's so refreshing not only to see practical costumes and effects, but stop motion to be on the big screen in 2024 after being so used to seeing just this slog of CGI movies coming out in recent years. This is so refreshing to see. There's a lot of creativity thrown into this to an extent that doesn't feel like a rehash of the original movie. There's a lot of creative ideas and characters and jokes here that had me smiling wildly whenever they would appear on screen. This is a very colourful movie too, perhaps even more colourful than the original movie. While that movie had a great display of colour, they seemed to be more washed out and grungy looking in that first movie to match the visual style and the macabre feeling of it all, while this movie opts for a more vibrant and neon colored paint over the whole thing, which worked for this installment, and feels like it was solely done as a nod to the original movie coming out in the 80s, as Hollywood is still obsessed with milking that 80s nostalgia. The cinematography was also really good here too. The colour, like I said, is used well and is contrasted well with the shadows and lights on the terrains and actors in the scenes, but as for a lot of the shots, it has Burton's usual style over it. In terms of cinematography, he isn't exactly known for using certain techniques, but the visuals always manage to pop out through the cinematography. I think the biggest problem this movie suffers from is feeling overly stuffed. The magic of that original movie is that the story may have a lot of ideas at the front, but it doesn't manage to complicate things, and I wouldn't say this movie is confusing or anything, but it does suffer from having way too many different subplots going on, and it's honestly hard to keep up with at times. And they try hard to tie them all together neatly, but it still feels like there's a bit too much going on. I think at the writer's room, they could have chopped down a lot of storylines, and another draft could have been made for a more neat and concise story to follow. Every character here feels like they're trying to share the movie and have their own story going on, and after a while it gets hard to keep up with it all. There was one specific plot point that I can't fully get into without saying spoilers, but it's a plot line which causes the third act to properly get going, and I think this catalyst could have been something else entirely, as whenever the subplot keeps coming up, it felt like it severely slowed things down in the movie. I thought the soundtrack in this was pretty good. There's a heavy emphasis on 70s disco music, which I thought was an odd choice considering the original movie is an 80s movie, but this isn't something I'd complain about too heavily. All of the songs that were picked were used well in all of the scenes they were in, and they managed to make them all work to their fullest degree. On top of this, the score was really fun and catchy to listen to as well, featuring songs from the original movie and some new tunes made for this one, all made by Danny Elfman, who most of the time pulls out a really great score, and this is another example of that too. Overall, I had a really fun time with this movie. It was honestly just nice to see Tim Burton back to his old tricks again, as it felt like he'd lost his stride so much in recent years, but thankfully this film has enough creativity to prove the guy has, for lack of a better word, and with no pun intended, still has a good lot of juice in him to make some really fun and ridiculous pictures. While I do think this installment sanitizes a lot of the more dark elements of the original, there's still a whole lot of laughs to be had here. Along with that, we witness some really great looking visuals that make for a good, entertaining watch, and in all honesty, a pretty worthy sequel. I'm giving Beetlejuice 4 stars. This has some really fun, engaging, and hilarious performances, notably from the likes of Dafoe, Catherine O'Hara, and of course, Keaton. All of the effects look great and display a huge deal of imagination that is lacking on the big screen lately. However, a lot of the movie does get brought down by a story that has way too much going on, to the point it almost makes it feel sluggish, but thankfully there's enough heart and enough laughs that will keep you hooked from start to finish. People that love the original movie will get a kick out of this, even if it doesn't live up to the expectations of its predecessor. But with all of that being said, I'd say this is worth checking out on the big screen.